Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Scuttlebutt. I'm your host, Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit in Western PA whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. Connection and communication are kind of the themes of this particular episode. We have on a guest veteran who you may have seen before in our recent Vietnam music episode, Donn Nemchick. And we also invite Jim Roberts, who's also a Vietnam War era Army veteran, onto the program. We're going to be talking about letters home from the front, letters from families to the front. Donn served in the Navy, so he was on ship. Well, Jim was in the bush in Vietnam. How did they receive mail? What was the mail like? We talk about Dear John and Dear Jane letters, the origination of that Dear John sort of terminology. So something that I'd never really thought about or gotten into about what were in these letters and what were people writing to each other, and were they sanitizing these letters to not let their family members worry about the things that they were getting into. We talk really heavily about that. We also go back in time a bit and talk about V-mail from World War II. So I think there'll be an interesting sort of bit of historical information in there for you. So enjoy this conversation. We also have some videos that we're going to play, some historical videos. So if you're listening to this on audio, you jump over to the YouTube side, be able to see some of these videos, but you will hear the audio of these old-fashioned, and we'll set them up, these old-fashioned videos. Excited to have you on board here for the Scuttlebutt. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast, and please like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell on YouTube so you're the first to know whenever we release new episodes. And you can always reach out to me, Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org with your own letter about, hey, this is what I think about the Scuttlebutt, or hey, these are some military topics that I haven't heard about, but I'd love to hear more information about. I'm happy to dive into those and release an episode based on your suggestions. Thank you so much, and enjoy the program. Donn, Jim, so excited for you guys to be a part of the podcast today. And people will know from the intro that we're talking about letters home from the front and letters to our servicemen and women from home. I think this is a really interesting subject, Donn, that you brought to me that I don't know much about, but it's something that's very personal for everyone involved. But I'm so happy that you are both here to talk about this and sort of give us a history of this as well, because letters to and from the front have been around for as long as there's been a front. And we'll get a bit into that. But first, let's have everybody introduce yourselves. Donn, I'd love for you to go first. Thanks for joining the Scuttlebutt.
Well, you're welcome, Sean. It's my pleasure to be here, of course. My name is Donn Nemchick. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran of the Vietnam era. I served from 1970, 1974, various communication stations within Southeast Asia as a radioman communicator. My final tour of duty was on board the USS Constellation, which is a attack aircraft carrier that flew the last combat air ops up in the Gulf of Tonkin, known as Yankee Station. And we were very proud of the USS Constellation service in the Navy. She served all from 65 all the way through to 73 in the Vietnam era. And actually, one of her pilots, Edward Alvarez, was the first pilot shot down and the longest POW who flew off the USS Constellation. And he's still with us today. He's still alive. So there's a lot of interesting stories. And I'll hand it off to Jim, who we're really happy to have on board with us today.
Well, thank you, Donn. Thank you, Sean. I'm delighted to be invited. I'm a veteran, U.S. Army. I was an infantry lieutenant. I got my bars the hard way. I went through OCS. I enlisted in '69 and got to Vietnam in April of '71, which was during Vietnamization. I was on a 5-man team called MAT 111, Mobile Advisory Team. I didn't work with a regular unit or an American unit. We lived in the village and worked with the Vietnamese in the jungles. I operated with one sergeant, Sergeant Turner. He was a sergeant first class. On his third tour, he was retiring at the end of his tour when he deroased. And so he and I worked together exclusively with the Vietnamese. And when I left Vietnam, I left the service. So that would have been in December of 1971.
Excellent. Thank you both. So yeah, we're here to talk about letters. And maybe we get just a bit of history here first, but as a civilian, I've heard the term Dear John or Dear Jane, but I didn't quite understand what that term meant and where it came from.
Okay, if I could add, Sean, how it originated, the name John, the male name John, was the most popular first name from, according to census, from about 1848 to about 1920. So in World War II, there's a lot of mail going back and forth, and guys were deployed for the duration, if you will. And whenever mail came through, if your girlfriend, your spouse, or someone was writing to you, and it was something pleasant or romantic, it would be, "Oh, my dearest John," or "Dearest Johnny," "My darling." However, if you got a "Dear John," that had an ominous tone to it. And guy says, "Oh man, I know this isn't going to be good." So the term "Dear John" was just kind of a moniker for that letter that you were going to get. That oftentimes was not welcome, of course. But interestingly enough, the Vietnam era was reported to have the most Dear Johns written to them. And I had a theory about that. I was talking to my spouse about it this morning. My wife says, probably because society had changed and women were now more free. There was women's lib. There was women were out more. So they had the opportunity now to say, "I'm not going to wait for this guy for 13 months." And things happened. So I think that term "Dear John" just became the term for something, this isn't going to be good. Now, of course, we have "Dear James," but I think that's how it originated, with the fact that John was the most popular first name for a very long period of time.
So mainly it was a letter of a girlfriend breaking up with you.
That's correct.
Well, what's interesting is I trained troops in the Army. We used to call cadence when we marched to keep everyone in step. And some of the cadences, most of them you really can't use nowadays in a public setting like this. But we have what we call Jody calls. And this was kind of preparing the GI for this. Two of the Jody calls that I remember were, "Jody, Jody, don't look back." No, "Trainee, trainee, don't look back. Jody's got your Cadillac. Jody, Jody, don't be blue. Trainee, trainee, don't be blue. Jody's got your girlfriend too."
Jody was the made up name of the guy who's taking your spot when you were gone. So
he was going to take care of everything for you.
Taking care of everything. There are some Jody calls that we can't repeat today, of course.
Right.
But back in our day, of course, things were somewhat different. There was more luster to it, I think, and that's kind of just the way military was. Whether it was right or wrong, I'm not here to say, but there was more to it than that. And many of us remember those. Jody's got your gal and gown.
Did either of you get a Dear John letter?
I got a semi-Dear John letter, if you will. And here's what it was.
Interesting. A semi-Dear John. That's interesting.
Semi-Dear John. I wasn't totally romantically involved with a girl that I was seeing early on. Yeah, we were close friends. It was my prom date. We were seeing each other that summer of love, if you will. And she tended to be she was an artist, and she tended to be, I'll just use the term, hippie style, and cute kid, long hair, very cool and all this. And she didn't want me to go into the service, number one. Well, I was already committed. And then number two, knowing that I was going to go to Southeast Asia, when I was home on leave, she wanted me to go to Canada and all this other stuff that some other guys were doing. And I wasn't going to have that. So a short period of time later, when she wrote me, she was going on her merry way. And I wasn't crestfallen or so blue that I was distraught, but it was a kind of a semi-Dear John. It was almost expected because I was going to be gone for a long time, and she was a young woman going to college. Our paths actually still crossed, but she was just of another ilk. And you have to remember, those times the society was changing so rapidly, Jim. I think you can attest to that. In late 60s, early 70s, things were just changing so fast, the way we were as a country, and men and women. So it was just the way it was. So I call it kind of a semi-Dear John. However, in my unit, I do remember a guy who got the hard Dear John. He got the big one. And I can remember it pretty well because there's some humor to it. He gets his letter from his girlfriend, and he's reading, and he says, "What the hell is she doing? Going out with Ronnie? They're going to the beach next week. Who's this Ronnie guy? No, this is terrible, blah, blah. I'm never opening a letter from her again." He went on and on. So he gets some other letters. He's not opening them. He's throwing them down. He's all beside himself. And finally, he goes home, okay? Doesn't look her up when he goes home. 2 weeks later, approximately, she comes and visits him, and she says, "Denny, why didn't you come and see me? You're home now. I wanted to see you. I wanted to be your girlfriend." He goes, "Well, you were going out with that guy, Ronnie. What do you expect me to do?" She says, "What guy, Ronnie? That's my friend, Rhonda." Okay, so he mistook the name Ronnie, her nickname, for a guy's name, of course, understandable. And he was just beside himself up and down. So it's kind of a funny story, if you will. Those things happen, but there's always a guy that got it and say, "Look, man, as shipmates, buddies always say, look, there's other fish in the sea. You're a young guy. Everything will be all right. It's tough to take if you get one of those. And if you're so romantically inclined that you think that the world's going to end, it could be a morale breaker for a while.
I got married on my way. I had I had a month off between training at Fort Bragg and training at Fort Bliss, so we got married in there, and so there were no Dear Johns. So fortunately.
But a Dear John could not just be a girlfriend breaking up with you. Could it be a wife saying, I'm divorcing you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
And so, yeah, that would be highly tied into the morale of how you're feeling while you're away from home, and pining to be back, pining to be with the person you want to be with, and that's your connection, I guess. But those aren't the only letters that people would receive. They receive letters from their family or their friends, as well. And those weren't titled anything. Those weren't Dear John type letters. Those were just, family correspondences.
That's right. It could be Dear Son or Hey, buddy, how you doing? And I recall pretty vividly, a lot of my guys, my male friends would write to me, oh, man, the pirates are doing this. You have to remember, there's no internet back then. Okay. Our only connection was snail mail. And in Southeast Asia, the Stars and Stripes kind of government sanctioned newspaper. And in the Navy, you had the fleet broadcast where they would just give you some scores or some highlights and things like that. So communications from the outside world was very scarce. So when you got your letters, that was your contact back home. You want to know what your buddies were doing. As boring as they would say it was. And I recall some letters very, very much, because especially this time of year, they'd write to me and say, oh, Don, the weather really is bad again, and man, we can't go out and play basketball. But you can envision that as you were 8,000 miles away. You can envision what their life was like. They're doing the same thing that we did back 2 years ago or so. But you wanted to hear from that, because that was your connection back to the world, which we called the United States back then, Jim. If you remember, what's happening in the world? Whenever a new guy would come in, almost first thing you'd go up to him, hey man, what's happening in the world? And that was our connection when we got our letters back and forth. And again, it was called snail mail. Fortunately, in the Navy, we got our mail pretty quickly. And I know, Jim, you were probably, when you were out in the bush, your mail wasn't as frequent as others.
Well, I was fortunate. I didn't have a typical tour. So I was with a 5-man team. We also had a 4-man district team, and we lived in a compound that was a former Special Forces camp. And we didn't move, even though we were supposed to be mobile, because everyone we were advising was right there in this one place. There was no rural population, so we got a work chopper almost every day, not every day. And so the mail came whenever the chopper came, but it didn't always come. It would come in batches. You might go a week, and then you'd get 6 or 7 letters.
Jim, were you APO or were you FPO?
APO.
APO. And Sean, what that is, whenever you addressed a letter, Jim was in the Army, so he would be APO, Army Post Office. I was in the Navy, mine would be FPO, Fleet Post Office.
Mine was APO SF 96399.
There you go.
And so that got it to me. And it's all you needed. You didn't need anything else except a name.
Yeah.
But mail would come in batches. And of course, when we were in the field on an operation, for the way we worked, there was no resupply. When we left on the operation, either by truck or by helicopter, the only communication we had occasionally was by radio. So there was no food, no water, no mail. If we were out for 7 days, when we would get back, you'd have a stack of things waiting for you on you, which was interesting, because in the book I wrote, I said I wrote every night. That's really not true. I wrote most nights, but when I go to the field, I would write. I guess one thing to bring up is, one of the things in all the email I wrote was the lie of omission. I never told them what was going on tactically. My wife actually thought that for the time I was there, I was at a resort guarding the swimming pool, sort of, and there was never a tactical mention. And so in writing mail to other people who were going to be talking to her, I never said a thing. And for 50 years, I thought this was right. But after writing the book, I've started reading, thanks to Kindle and all those things, I've started reading a lot of the books that have been written by people in different jobs than mine, the helicopter, artillery, whatever you want. And I was really surprised. And this is what I love about the Veterans Breakfast Club, is we find out we all did the same thing and we don't know it. Everyone said, I never told anyone what was going on because I didn't want them to worry.
Yeah.
I didn't want my mom to worry. And so, we all like kept this big secret. And so when I would go to the field on the 5 or 7 day operation, I would actually write an email, I'd write a letter and write a bunch of them. And I would date them during the dates that I was in the field, give them to the team medic who didn't go to the field. He was there, and he would drop one in the mailbox, in the mail bag for the chopper to pick up on the appropriate day. So it looked like I was always in camp. I was never out. And so, that's just the way I did it. It was part of the ruse of trying to keep Linda from knowing, just exactly what was going on and how bad things really were.
Yeah, sanitizing the letters, I think, was probably the norm, because I think a lot of guys, when they wrote, Jim, if they were out on an operation or something, when they came back or had time to write, they didn't want to go back to that. Okay, they wanted to say, "Oh, it's hot here. We just got a gift." The letters are almost so much the same. Send more gift bags, gift boxes to us, care packages they were called, and send the sweetened Kool-Aid, not the unsweetened Kool-Aid, and make sure that you get us some dry socks or whatever. The letters were almost all the same. I've read, there's several books, and we're going to touch base on that, Sean, I think, and some videos out about letters home. And most of them are so similar, because it's the same. We want this. How's everybody doing? Kiss the dogs for me. How about them buckos? What are they doing this season? How are they going to be? And I can't wait to get home. As soon as I get home, make sure that you have something for me. Blah blah blah. But it's interesting because most did not. However, Sean, I think you're going to read the letter that I had sent you from my cousin who was killed in action in 1966. It's an emotional letter, and it's also a historical letter. I think it's going to come across well, Sean.
Definitely. Here, I'll bring up a picture of him before I read the letter. So when you say sanitize, it was a personal sanitization of the experience you were having, not necessarily the government or the army, military's sanitization of tactical information that could be within the letter. But that was happening as well, right?
No. None of my letters were ever censored or opened.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I think that stopped in World War II,
right.
And I think you'll touch base on that. Yeah, but nobody read
there was no one reading our mails
either.
Right. There was no one reading our mails.
Okay. Well, you should be for those watching on YouTube, you should be seeing a picture of his name's Mike Nemchick. Mike Nemchick there. This picture was taken. Do you know?
Yeah, he was killed in February 22nd, 1966. 1 week shy of his 19th birthday. We can see the helicopters in the back. They were going on what was called Operation Masher. Okay, in Bong Song province, there was a heavy influx of North Vietnamese coming south. They knew they had to stop them. So his letter tells of his feelings volunteering for a mission that he knew that he was not coming back from. And this was his last letter to his mother. So that was probably written sometime mid-February 1966.
And this is how the letter goes. Hello, Mom. I hope you are fine. I'm writing this letter on the eve of my departure to a place called, you said Bong Son?
Yeah.
I'm going there on a 30 to 90-day hurricane Postal. You've probably heard a lot about this place in the news. We've killed over 600 VC in the last 2 weeks there. Mom, I'll be truthful. Our team volunteered to go on a suicide patrol there. We're not expected to come back. I don't want you to worry, because I know God will only let the right thing happen. I feel I must go, because the sooner we get this war over, the sooner all the guys get to go home again. Our mission is extremely important in helping to end this rotten war. I feel glad and proud to aid in this mission. I just want you to know that I'm doing this because I want to. I volunteered. I could have backed out if I had wanted to. I love everyone at home, and I feel sure that I'll be back home okay and on time next year. So I guess I'll close now and write again when I get the chance. Say hello to everyone for me and give them my love. Love always, Mike. P.S. Please don't worry. God will watch over me.
So that's the type of letter that you have to remember. That was early in the war. Mike was 18 years old when he wrote that. Probably, like I said, probably a week or so before he was killed. And that letter was delivered almost the same time as the telegram that his mother received that he was KIA. Remembering in '66, that's how they notified people by Western Union telegram. So that letter is very poignant, I think, and it has a historical background. What was interesting, the operation that he was on was actually called Operation Masher, but then it was changed to Operation like Blowing Wind. because they didn't want it to sound so harsh, like Operation Masher. They were beginning to say, we don't want to show this war as being so violent or whatever. It was odd that they changed the name of that. We always wondered about that too. So Mike was a brave young man, and he was a very faithful man, as you can tell. So I thought that letter was poignant, because not all the letters were back and forth. How you doing? Can't wait to get home. He was actually saying what he was going to do and why he did it.
Yeah.
And I found that to be not only unusual, but somewhat historical. And I'm glad you shared it with us today, Sean.
Yeah, I'm glad you shared it with me. And really, I can't kind of imagine writing that letter. You're telling your mom, like, hey, this is really dangerous. I don't know if I'll come back, but this is what I want to do, and I want you to be okay with, if I'm gone.
You're actually saying goodbye to your mother.
Yeah. Yeah.
At 18 years old. He graduated high school in June of 65, in country November of 65, killed in action February 66. So you can see how fast that time frame was.
Yeah.
And with that young man to write that type of heartfelt letter stays with you. It really does.
Certainly. And so his mother kept the letter?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Not all the letters, I'm sure, from the front are probably as difficult to write or, difficult to receive. What about receiving, I mean, other than the Dear John letters, but receiving sort of bad news from home, if a family member had passed away, things like that? Did either of you receive that, or know someone who did receive a letter like that?
I got a letter with some bad news in it, but it wasn't anyone dying.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I dated our emails, our letters, but we made a mistake. We should have numbered them. So I got mail one day which said the mechanic said the damage wasn't too bad on the car. It'll still pass inspection. So, and it went on, and I'm going, mechanic, damage, car, what happened? Well, that immediately is a reply to her, which takes maybe a week to get to her.
Mm-hmm.
The reply back takes a week to get back. So you're 2 weeks wandering around. Is my wife okay? Is she doing to me what I'm doing to her, not telling the truth? Is this worse than I thought? And so there was always, whenever anything came in, it was potentially negative. It was always this fear of, did it really go bad? And is this not the whole story? So from losing people in the family, I was fortunate at the time I was there, because it didn't happen to anyone.
So people at home were sanitizing their letters as well.
You never knew. You never knew. He's over there. Who knows what he's doing? Let's not make him feel bad. So you never really knew what was, if you were getting the whole story.
I recall getting a real bad news letter. It was 71, and my real very dear friends of the family, neighbors where I lived at in McKeesport, there was a devastating fire where their 13-year-old daughter and her 13-year-old girlfriend had a sleepover. They succumbed in the fire, and the family was just, the whole neighborhood was just shocked and things. And some of my buddies wrote to me and told what happened, sent me the press clipping from the McKeesport paper and such like that. And I felt so badly, because I was still a young guy, 19, and those things hadn't hit me yet. Okay, I know that the death of my cousin in 1966 and other passings of grandparents and things like that, but it really hadn't hit me from a friend standpoint. And I remember, man, I had the blues for a couple of days. And it was the grief that you felt for their loss, but it was the fact that you couldn't do anything about it. Okay, I'm 8,000 miles away. All we can do is write letters, all that kind of stuff. And that's what hit me the worst. I said, I want to call them. I want to talk to them. And we had that ability, but it wasn't that open. So I couldn't have gone to the Red Cross and say, because it was just family friends. It wasn't a family matter. So I kind of sucked it up and let that stay with me. But that's the bad news that I got. And interesting, they used to have. I used to be the lead operator in the communications for submarines broadcast out of the Fleet Center in Guam. We communicate with all the submarines in the Western Pacific. It's called C-Sub, Communication Submarines. And they would send through RF radio frequency communications to the submarines in the ocean. And when there wasn't something operational going on, there was what's called family grams. And they were just 2-sentence two sentences that would say, "Hi, John. Bobby got an A in mathematics. Can't wait till you get home. See you in 6 months." They were just these short blurbs. However, they were also the ability to say, "Hey, your grandfather passed away." And it's my understanding that those family grams, I think the sailors, particularly on submarines, can opt out of getting that bad news message if they chose to. They say, "Well, I'd rather not hear it. I'll hear it when I get ashore or something." And I know when we were in the Fleet Center during Operation Linebackers 1 and 2 and such, where there was such heavy bombing going on in Vietnam, we were sending messages, air operations and coordinates and things out to the ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, and we were working 12 hours a day. We had 6 send circuits. They were just busy sending flash and immediate style messages, highly operational, and it just wasn't airtime for the routine messages of family grams or family messages and such. And as they built up in the stacks of, we had ticker tape actually that was used to transmit. Once those built up, periodically they would put them in burn bags, Jim, and they would be picked up and flown out to the carriers at sea and then distributed as they could print them out. So as not to take radio airtime, they would just print them out and get them to guys, which would really delay the whole thing. So those were interesting days because communications was oftentimes choppy. It depends on what happens during the war effort. Again, those circuits were out there for operational purposes, and the family grams and stuff like that. Yes, they were important. Yes, it was a morale issue. However, they just had to dedicate those circuits to operations.
One of the things, mail is a two-way street, and so we on the team when we were in camp, we pulled radio watch depending on how many people were there. When I got there, we were pulling it every 8th night, and then it was down to like every 3rd night when we finally decided we couldn't pull radio watch anymore. But one of the things you would do at night would be to write letters, and we'd shut the generator. We ran generators for the camp. We shut them down at midnight and started them up at 6 a.m. So between midnight and 6 a.m., we had a Coleman lantern. So you'd sit there and write corners, and you'd try to sit in the shadow because, again, this is something else I always worried about till I wrote the book, and then the guys on the team read it. Is we'd set it to radio in case anything was going on. Now, we couldn't contact our headquarters at Province, but we could pick up radio calls from helicopters. And every now and then you get, they don't usually fly at night, but if they did, we could always set up an emergency light and bring them in if they were having trouble. But you always had this vision in your mind of the Viet Cong knew where we lived, where we slept. They could find where we were sleeping, in blindfolded. So you always had this vision of this Viet Cong running through the door with a sapper with an explosive charge on his back, pulling the fuse. And so you kind of hide in a shadow somewhere with your M16 in your hand, hoping you could take him out before he pulled the fuse. Now, while I was there, that never happened. It did happen at our province headquarters, unfortunately. But you'd write letters, and it was an interesting two-way street because, like you said, they're like the emails we write now during the pandemic. "Hi, how are you? Things are fine." But one day we cracked open a can of .45 caliber ammunition, and the inspection card in it was dated 1950. So I turned it over and wrote a Mother's Day card on the back and sent it off to my mother-in-law. And this is a Claymore mine. This is what's left of a Claymore mine bag.
Here, let me spotlight you for everyone on YouTube if you're watching.
Basically, this is a Claymore mine bag, which I cut up, and I wrote a letter on the back to one of Linda's uncles. And so we basically tried to do whatever we could to keep things as lively as we could. And again, I think it was to try and convince people that we weren't really in bad shape over here. We were doing pretty well. So, but that was it. The other thing that's interesting, and maybe you want to bring this up, is we didn't use stamps.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah.
And we just wrote the word free up here. And the reason I'm hiding this is we had to put our social security number on this. And so in those days, we had serial numbers. Then they switched to social security numbers because there was no internet. No one cared. So now everyone hides them. So basically, you put your name, social security number, and then you wrote free over here and the address, and it went away. So we could write as many letters as we had time to write, and it didn't cost us a penny to mail. I don't know what it's like now for the soldiers that were in Afghanistan and Iraq. Probably the same.
Probably the same if they use snail mail at all, because they had electronic communications. But interesting with that envelope. And it was funny because my wife we were talking about this morning over coffee, and she remembers writing. She had some pen pals back in the day, and she remembers writing to a couple GIs, and she said, I always remember the envelopes. They had this red, white, and blue border. Okay, it just as you showed up, Jim, and oftentimes the stationery that we got often would have like mine was USS Constellation, have an image on the ship on it in like this real light blue. And in the communication stations I was in, you would go to the PX and get a box of envelopes and paper, and they would have that image of that particular duty station ship, or in map of Vietnam or wherever. And many people who have saved their letters, they're very distinctive. Okay, it was like the old airmail letter. I think if some of us of the era can remember those airmail letters, they were real thin paper and
Yes,
free. You
lightweight.
had to pay postage. Yeah.
Well, what was interesting is we got these. We used to get what was called an SP or a sundry pack, SSB pack. And the numbers were, it was good for one man for 100 days or 100 men for 1 day. So a 5-man team should get one every 20 days. The 4-man district team should get one every 25. And we got one a month. But that had cigarettes, and we always had candy. And that candy, that's where we got the candy to give to the kids in the village. But we would get a stack of envelopes and letters and ballpoint pens. And so this is where our stationery came from. And that's probably why they're all the same, because they were being supplied by the government in these SP.
Did they have those stale chiclets? Little
oh, yeah.
Chiclets?
Yeah. The one candy I couldn't give away was they had these Hershey's tropical chocolate bars, which would not melt. And you could put them in a canteen cup over a block of C4, and the stuff would just get gooey. And so we could give away anything, but not that stuff. We couldn't give the Hershey tropical chocolate bars away. The other Hershey bars,
because the kids didn't want them, or
no, they wouldn't take them.
They wouldn't melt. It was terrible. And were they the little 3 packs of cigarettes, or 3 or 4 pack? And it was either Kent cigarettes or I don't think they did the menthols, because menthols were so popular. I think it was a Kent cigarette. It was always like an off-brand, Old Gold or something. And
well, those were in the C rations.
They were in the
C rations. We got in the SP packs. We'd get 10 cartons of cigarettes with 10 packages each. That's 100 packages. Hence, 1 pack a day. And it was, I didn't smoke. We also got cigars and a package of chewing tobacco, and no one chewed. That went to the village. But this is called winning the hearts and minds and helping their health. But it was always interesting because you'd have Marlboro, you'd have the good cigarettes, and you have Chesterfields, and no one wants. So they would divvy it up. And it was quite raucous. But if someone was not there, if someone was in Saigon or Benoit, or out on an operation, if we were out on an operation, when the pack came in, when they got back, they got what was left.
They got home.
And then every now and then we'd open a pack that had been opened in the rear, and all the good stuff had been taken out, and everything was like 10 cartons of Chesterfields.
Oh,
so that was one of the reasons we really didn't like some of the rear echelon guys.
There's a name for that we won't share
right,
with the public.
Right. The acronym is RIMF, but anyway.
That's right.
So technically, like someone sending a letter to you, they had to address it with just your name and your ship or your
APO number.
And where would they drop it off? Do you just go to the post office and drop it off?
Yeah. Let's see, like in my case, on the when I was on the ship, it would just be my name, USS Constellation, FPO San Francisco 12345, and the FPO postmasters would put it in the Constellation's box. Then it would finally get fine sorted, and in many cases, like I was a radio man, so I was an RM3, so that would give some designation that I was in the communications division. That would help them sort it. But yeah, they could just there wasn't 123 Main Street. Now some of them could say Fort Hood, Texas, or whatever command was. And by the time it got to the command, then it was fine sorted, and it got to you, believe it or not.
I just said Lieutenant Jim Roberts, Republic of Vietnam, APO.
APO.
That was it.
So at some point, though, it changes hands from the United States Post Office to the military, and then the military has to further sort of divide it. And that's something that interests me, is because, you were on ship, Don, and you were, in the bush, Jim, but, that's what you said, like getting mail was just, that's where it would find its way to you.
Yeah.
And even if you were out in the ship and sailing, if a plane would come in with the with the mail, and that's how you,
it was an orange bag, and they would dump it on the deck, and the guys would pick it up. Actually, the ship had a ship's post office, and there's actually a designated rate in the Navy, postal clerk.
I was going to ask that you took that was my next question, is like, I don't think we've ever on VBC ever had a mail clerk on to tell their story about like getting mail in and sorting it, and
that'd be interesting to find one, because it'd be interesting to see if they still have that rate also. But back then it was a postal clerk, and many guys, I know where I live, the local post office up there, the two guys that switched back and forth, they were both veterans. And as soon as you got discharged, you had veterans preference. You went to work for the post office. Okay, it was
Mhm.
kind of a natural transition to you, and many of them retired from it with the government pension and everything like that. But yes, once it got out of the regular post office hands, it went into the military's hands, and I got everything that was ever sent to me. So
Mhm.
that said, they did a good job trying to do it. I think they realized what it meant to people, and I think Jim is right. Sometimes you always get a guy that's going to pilfer something, and that happens. Usually that gets policed internally. You see another guy doing that, man. You tell him it's a wrong thing to do. What about the guys on the other end? So that said, they did a good job, especially on the ship. We got our mail very regularly. Of course, I was on a carrier, so planes
Mhm.
were coming in and out, helicopters and stuff. So we had regular stuff. Actually, we got the mail for our sister ships. For example, we'd have a destroyer escort and a cruiser alongside us, or an oiler or something like that. So we would get their mail, they would bag it up, and then whenever we were doing underway replenishments, which is a whole operation within itself, they would highline it. They would shoot a line over to the ship and send bags of different things over, and actually
Mhm.
personnel. They would bosun's chair. They would ship, push them over on this line, and take them across from one ship to another with the ocean bobbing up and down below you. But they would send mail that way too. So there, it was a good, at least in our time, 1970-ish. That was a pretty fluid operation.
For
Which
us, I was in 3 Corps, which where Saigon is, and so I assume the mail went to the Corps headquarters in 3 Corps. They sorted it out by province, and the
Yeah.
mail went to province by helicopter, and the province probably the S1 shop just sorted it out based on where we were. And we get a mail bag when the work chopper would come in. We'd take a bag. We'd take a mail bag out with what we were sending and exchange them.
Mhm.
And
I think they were orange bags, if I remember right. They were like this bright
I
orange
think they
with
were. I
red.
think they were indeed
Yeah,
orange. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. And so we basically had film. Somehow each district team, we didn't have it. We were with the district team. They had a movie projector, and
Yeah.
we had four districts in the province, and they'd get 5 films. And so you 4 films, you'd get one a week. And so
Mhm.
you'd send one in on Monday, and then one would come in Tuesday, and you could show it. And even the Vietnamese, they like the Westerns. Vietnamese, even though they couldn't understand a word, we would just hang a sheet outside, put the projector on it, and the RF troops would come in and with their families and watch the Indians and the cavalry. Maybe they realized it really wasn't much different from what we've been doing for 100 years.
Maybe. Well, that brings me up to our sort of history segment here. I'm gonna share my screen and bring up a picture. Don, you had mentioned something about V-mail. So we have email now. We had letters, Vietnam. We had V-mail back in World War II. Don, you want to speak a bit about this, and we could also show the video.
I do. I'll open up the video. And here's this fetching young lady writing to her GI overseas, of course, and be with him at every mail call. That's how important it was. They emphasized every mail call because your day was often designated. I had a good day. I got 3 letters today. And often a bad day was when I didn't get any mail. But what's funny, we'd read everybody else's mail. Guy would read his, hey, come on, read my letter too. And so you get some feedback of what was going on back in the world. But you can see V-mail is private, reliable, and patriotic. And when you show the video, it will be explained, I think, very well. That this was a way that there's so much mail going through space. Space was an issue. So I think it was the Kodak company developed this. It's called Recordec. It was a microfilm in short, make it easy to understand. And I think this film will explain it very well. So, Sean, if you're ready, let her roll.
Okay, everyone should see this if you're on YouTube, but you'll hear it audio. This is a video from World War II era, correct?
That's correct. These openings are great. They really are. You have to remember, these were showed in movie theaters.
Yeah, that's where everybody got their information from the front.
There's no TV back then.
Right. News service speeds mail to U.S. troops, is what it says on screen.
Letters from home. Each day, millions of them are sent to American servicemen fighting on distant battlefronts. Because of a war postal system called V-mail, they can be flown throughout the world, reaching distant points safely and with amazing speed. This plane is landing in Italy. Each bag of mail it carries contains 136,000 letters. Back in America, each letter was reduced to a tiny strip of film.
And on screen, there's a huge mountain of bags, of mail bags.
Now, near the front, automatic machines enlarge each overseas letter from 16mm motion picture negative to a 4x5-inch print. These strips are dried, carefully inspected, and cut into individual letters. Machines fold them and put them into envelopes. In this one laboratory, over 300,000 letters a day are handled. A complete locator card system takes care of mail incorrectly addressed. In the censorship section, anything that might reveal vital military information is cut out. At mail call, Americans overseas receive their letters. Nearly every transport plane that spans the ocean brings its quota of mail. In just a few days, V-mail letters from home reach servicemen in every theater of war.
Well, that's incredible here. I'll stop the share. So, you know, what's so interesting is that, like, the idea of shrinking down something bigger to bite size and then blowing it back up again, it's kind of what, you know, the internet is. Like, if I'm going to send you a big, long email, it's going to shrink it down, shoot it over to you, and then you blow it back up. But that, to me, is an enormous operation just to be, yeah.
Do you see the one guy with that old-fashioned paper cutter?
Yeah.
You know, you get a big strip of paper and he's cutting it to size, 8.5 by 11 or whatever. And that was his job the whole day, man. You can imagine 8 hours just cutting that cutting that paper. So, and the vastness of it, those huge bags of mail and all this communications, correspondence going back and forth. It meant a lot. And that was only at the end of World War II that ceased. Of course, we didn't have it back in our era, Jim, and Korea, I don't believe, had it either. And then, of course, now the people now have internet, so they email and have communications of much easier methods. But back then, I just found that so fascinating when I was doing some research for today's show.
What struck me is I just wonder if that stack of mailbags was every day. Did they get a stack every day, or was that 1 week's worth? Because you know, it's one of the things I've always said about jobs in the military is better the devil you know than the devil you don't. I mean, I'll take the jungle over Afghanistan any day, and believe it or not, I would take walking the missions in the jungle and dealing with that pile of email.
Yeah.
I mean, that almost scared me more than the jungle. It's just overwhelming.
Yeah, certainly incredibly overwhelming. It's I just can't, it's hard for me to fathom the operation that the military decided to take on to be able to get all of that hundreds of thousands of letters in and out of the front simply for morale.
And censor them as well.
Yeah,
so you were having someone else read your letters. I don't know if that would be an interesting job or not, because, you know, some of the letters probably contain a lot of good
personal
with each other and stuff. And guys are guys back in the military. You tell you, but you should see what I read out of Johnny's letter, etc. But that would be an interesting job. I'd really like to talk to someone that had that task and see what was really like being a censor. Did you just look for the operational things, or were you looking for something more salacious?
I have a hard enough time reading my own writing. I'm sure it was difficult reading everybody's handwriting. Of course, then again, back then people were trained a bit better on being able to write a letter.
They had cursive writing, and we were all taught that, Jim. Of course, I can remember grade school, they had the cursive writing, each letter above the blackboard, and that's how you learn. Interesting. Look at the Civil War, Ken Burns' documentary, and how they portrayed these letters, how fluid their writing. And most of these guys were farmers. They were not educated men, and how beautiful their writing was, just from the legibility of it, plus their wordings of things. It was far impressive. And that's how that Civil War series, I think, it gained so much popularity, because they had the music behind it, and of course the voice actors did a great job. But then they were actually reading these letters from guys at Gettysburg and Shiloh and all these horrific battles. They were writing letters back then.
Mm-hmm. Well, you say, like you say, you know, logistics is a big part of winning a war. You've got to take care of your troops, and mail is if you don't have the mail, you're not going to have the morale you need to do the job you have to do.
That's right. And in basic training, I don't think they use that as a lever. Oftentimes in basic, there's a reward factor. Cigarettes were used like that. We talked about that a while ago. If you didn't perform that day well on the grinder, or if you didn't match up well with your classes, or you guys were messing around too much, our drill instructor would say, well, you guys don't get your smoke break today. You guys are screwing up, and so you don't deserve a smoke break. So, that's it. And I don't know if they use mail call like that and say, well, we're not going to get your mail to you today. I have my doubts, because I remember getting mail in boot camp, and I do remember, I remember a couple guys who were already in the service sending me some contraband when I was in boot camp, and I was kind of smart enough. It was just some Playboy pictures and such, but I remember being told right away about the contraband, so I threw my stuff away quickly. I didn't, hang on to it. So that those things happened though, but I don't think that was the point. I don't think they withheld mail purposely, but I think they watched what you were looking at.
Well, the interesting thing, right, when I was in basic and also when I was training troops, we never hold mail up. But what was interesting was when you had a change of location, you change of station, your mail could take a while to catch up. And if a trainee were recycled, you sprain an ankle real bad or get really sick, you could be recycled back a week or two. That would take some time for the mail to catch up, which is probably not much different today than when you change your address at the post office. So
in our case, our company number would have changed. I was in company 352, so if I would have gotten set back 2 weeks because of illness or didn't perform well, then I would be in a different company. So they would have to sort that out. But you're absolutely right. That's how they found you. Okay, they either through your company designation or whatever. And I think interesting too, Sean, I had one of the questions that popped up in my mind: did the military make you correspond with your family? Because I remember in basic training, they says, look, it was like almost like a pre-written card. You signed your name to it and you sent it to your parents. Arrived safely in Great Lakes. We'll call back later or something like that. We'll write soon. Here's my address. That's what it was. Here's my address. RTC Great Lakes Company 352, Great Lakes, Illinois, 12345. And that's what it was. It was almost a boilerplate postcard to get to your family, to give them your address. And oftentimes, if guys chose not to write to their family, and maybe even in country particularly, and someone didn't hear from them for a long time, many parents would go to the Red Cross or their congressman, and very, very quickly the commanding officer would call you on the carpet and say, sit down here and write a letter, okay, because someone's asking about you. For whatever reason you're not writing, write a letter and get this off my back. But so in essence, the military will just use the word encourage you to stay in touch with your family.
The drill sergeant that I had, plus the drill sergeants that were in the company I was training officer, one of the things the drill sergeant would tell us, I better never get a call from the colonel about you not writing a letter home. Right. If you want to know pain, just don't write home.
I'm going to play a quick video here of this is also what is mail call. This is, I believe, I'm not sure if it's Air Force. Is something you sent me, Don.
I think it's Army.
Army. Okay, so you'll hear this. You'll see this on the YouTube side, and you also hear this on the audio side. So about a minute to 40 here. It's basic training mail call.
Mail call will be the best time of the day for you. It's a huge morale booster and will show you that there is an outside world where people still think and care about you. Tip number 1 about mail call: encourage your friends and families to write letters and inform them that you won't have access to Facebook, because you won't. Many of your friends and family won't write you, but don't feel bad. They have no idea what environment you'll be in at basic training, and they really can't relate. Mailing letters, cards, and family pictures, even newspaper articles are okay for a family member to send you. Do not have food, alcohol, gum, pornography, or weapons sent to you. You're only inviting lots of physical exercise from the drill sergeants. Another tip is, when sending mail, always encourage a return letter, because again, mail call is the best time of the day. Bring lots of stamps with you to basic training too. Stamps are a great way to make friends. With an inexpensive donation like the price of a stamp, finding friends will be a piece of cake. You can receive as many letters as you want at basic training. Your time to write back may be limited though. Don't write anything in return letters you might regret later though. Just understand, you're in a high stress environment and your responses shouldn't upset the person you're writing. I have seen recruits tell their parents they want to commit suicide. I have seen recruits tell their girlfriend they want to marry them. Yeah, a marriage proposal through a letter. Pretty romantic, but it happens a lot. I've seen it twice. Mail call will be your daily mental escape to your civilian life. So be sure to write down the addresses to your friends and family before you leave, and again, take lots of stamps with you.
All right, so two things about this. First one being him saying, I've seen this a lot. I've seen it twice. I just found that to be funny. But so that's a little different, though. It brings stamps with you where you guys used to be able to just write free on it, right?
Only in country.
Yeah.
Only in country.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, if you were in Vietnam, you could write free on it. But if you were in U.S., you had to use a stamp.
Correct. That's correct.
Interesting. Well, he certainly hits home the fact of, like, don't have anything sent to you because you're only inviting physical pain.
and they knew every drill instructors had 4 sets of eyes. They're like your mother. They can look behind it. They seen behind their back. And if you were skylarking around or there was something fishy going on, they knew right away. And then they find out who did it, and you did pay the price. And if you didn't pay the price, they made everybody else pay the price for you, which was even worse.
Yeah.
So it's better you took the punishment. Don't let your buddies take it for you. But it was interesting because some of it is common sense to us now. But you got a 17, 18, 19-year-old kid, never been away from home. He's starting to write letters. Oh my God, you should see what they're doing to me, and etc. Everybody had a story that they were sending back to their buddies who had served before. And they always come back and say, I remember when you told me how your drill instructor was making you run the grinder for 5 hours a day or whatever. And we had to do the same thing. So it wasn't anything unusual. So it was quite a time. We didn't have that type of instructional video back in our day, Jim, but I think that was how the military does now. Of course, they do a lot of things online, and I think they're more transparent and more informative than back in our day, clearly. But they would just tell us in so many words, don't do this, don't have them send you that, and, we'll leave it go at there. But
one of the things too about basic training and boot camp is when we were in, there were a lot of draftees.
Yeah.
Today, everyone's an all volunteer. Right. And so when I, for me, OCS was a 6-month grind. I didn't walk anywhere for 5 months. I ran for 5 months. But now it's a 3-month section. In my company, we started with 240 guys, and there were about 120 of us left at the end. And so now it's a different entry situation, and they want to get you through. And so in many ways, since you don't have a drafty military, you can have sort of a different attitude in basic. Because when I was a training officer, when I was a trainee, we had a lot of guys who were just very angry. I could use stronger words to say what their attitude was. And by and large, the attitude for some of them didn't get any better. Mm-hmm. And in AIT, advanced training in Fort Polk, we had a couple of guys who just didn't come back from the weekend. They just took off. Mm-hmm. And so I imagine that the environment inside of basic training or a boot camp right now is probably a little more supportive and different.
It's understandably, seeing some things on the media and just, looking through YouTubes and stuff like that. It's a different environment, of course. It's a different world. And clearly the fact that they're volunteers, so they want to be there in essence. And then you hear so many people listening to some talk shows and things about the violence and how bad some of the youth are. Well, you should just throw them in the military and that'll straighten them out. No, it won't. Because number one, there's not that tough drill instructor giving you corporal punishment and hands-on training, if you will. That doesn't happen anymore. And if you're not motivated, you're the worst thing that could be in a company. I don't want someone around me like that. And that's why when people say, oh, just throw them in the Marines or the Navy, they'll straighten them out. No, it doesn't work that way. It didn't work that way back in the day, although you always hear the stories. Well, the judge told me if I don't join the service, I'm going to go to jail. So here I am. And sometimes that worked out, but sometimes it didn't either. But nowadays that would never work out because the training methods that have changed dramatically, of course, Jim. I think we could both attest to that. Back in the 60s and 70s, it was a whole different world. So I think for the better.
One of the benefits for me, like I say, my tour is very atypical. Like I said, everyone on the team was a pro. They were there for a career. The Intel NCO was a citizen soldier, as was I. And so we did not have the problems that you would have in a large line unit, a TONE unit that was pushing in the bush, So like I say, I come back with a whole world of experience. And the other thing that's changed is, like you say, you've now got all of this. You can take your cell phone to basic training, I would assume. I don't know if you can keep it, but there's a lot of very instant communication. I don't know what gravity ordinary mail has today. I mean, I still write cards and I still write notes to people. Mm-hmm. And from what I like, people like getting a written note every now and then. And so I find that a nice way to contact people on special occasions.
Indeed it is, and especially the handwritten card. Just a real quick story. I got a handwritten note from a friend of mine from high school 50 some years ago. We hadn't seen each other, and we did just cross paths at an event. I was leaving, she was coming in. Oh, Mary, it's good to see you. Oh, Don, we'll see you next time. Well, my personal situation had changed. I was unable to go to some of the events, and she had found out what had happened. My wife has cancer, and busy with treatments and some other things. So she had written the most beautiful handwritten letter in cursive writing. I saved it because it was so heartfelt. If she would have sent the email with the same words, it would have been nice, but it wasn't as nice as that handwritten letter.
So as our audience, if you've been listening in for the program, if this has sort of piqued your interest of like war letters, interesting. I wonder, are they all just personal? Like, can no one read these? Well, there's actually some place, I'll share my screen here, and I'm going to put the link into the description as well. There's a place called the Chapman University, the Center for American War Letters. That is Chapman, CHAPMAN.edu. You can look up the Center for American War Letters. This is a unique and extensive manuscript collection of war letters from every American conflict, dating back all the way through Revolutionary War. This is something, Don, you also sent to me. Do you know anything about this? Have you ever submitted anything to them?
I have not submitted anything, Sean. When I came upon it, I says, boy, what a link this is to people who are watching this podcast, and how interesting this would be to just go back to and look and see how things from the different eras, the different letters, and what you can glean from that. The emotion, some of it humorous, some of it operational. You say, boy, this guy was headed out to Normandy in 2 weeks if he could, and all this other stuff. So I just thought this was a very, very interesting site that you can. I know I'll spend a lot of time looking at it. This
is something that your Mike Nemchick's letter could potentially be submitted to. Oh, yeah. You also sent me, and I'll also have these links into the description. Did the screen change for you?
Yes.
Okay, great. So on Amazon, there are several different books that Don sent over to me, one being Dear America, Letters Home from Vietnam. This is one of the books that you sent over to me. Another is also Letters from Vietnam, edited by Bill Adler. And another book, the third one being also called Letters from Vietnam, Dennis Hoy. I'm sure there's probably books from letters of different eras, letters home from World War II, letters home from potentially Iraq and Afghanistan. If there isn't one, I'm sure that there will be eventually. But there are resources to our audience. There are resources out there of places you can go and websites you can visit, books you can pick up that produce and print the letters that our GIs wrote. So I just find that to be a really excellent way for America to document the personal stories of all of the veterans that served.
Yes, there's a Center for Vietnam History in Texas Tech University. Actually, I'm in touch with them, and they were one of our guests on the Vetathon earlier this year on Memorial Day, and they have a vast collection. I actually I emailed them because I needed some help trying to navigate through their homepage, and because their system is, their collection is so vast. And a very nice woman called me and offered her help to me to help navigate this through. And we struck up a really good conversation. And I had sent her a book that we had written about our experiences here in McKeesport, where we lost 23 men, and sent her that book. They're going to catalog that, and if some historian wanted to find out what was life like in the Vietnam era, here's one of the things that would appear for them, and they would help them go through that. So it's Texas Tech University and ttu.edu, and it's the Center for Vietnam History. It's amazing. I'd like to go down to Lubbock, Texas someday and spend some time there. Hopefully that'll be in my near future.
And if you've been watching the Scuttlebutt for some time, you may have heard our season 7 premiere episode 1. And if you haven't watched the Scuttlebutt, that's fine, but check out our conversation with Douglas Terrell. Douglas came onto the podcast. He took letters from revolutionary time all the way up to today, condensed them, edited them into a 1-man, 1-hour performance. It's something that I'd love to bring to Pittsburgh, honestly, if I could ever figure out a theater to bring him to. But he does this. He's a civilian who is passionate about veteran stories, dove into letters home from men abroad, and took all these letters and created a 1-man show. And he performs that going across the country, performing around. The Douglas Terrell, look him up. It's called It's called The American Soldier is the one-man play that he tours. So as audience, check out my conversation with him on the Scuttlebutt earlier this season, but also check out his website because it's incredible what he did, taking these letters and turning it into a performance that people would be able to go and see and hear them and see them acted out live and just hear the words spoke out loud.
Todd, I wonder if that would be a good opportunity for soldiers and sailors to have that performance, Soldiers and Sailors Museum here in Pittsburgh, to have that performance in their venue, because that's I'm going to have to look that up actually, because that sounds real interesting to me.
Certainly, that's a great option. I will. Here in Pittsburgh, for our audience, we have Soldiers and Sailors Museum here in the Oakland area, right now by University of Pitt, and that'd be a great place for him to be able to perform that. I'm sure that they would love that. It's a great stage for that, in fact, as well. I want to thank both of you for coming on the program to talk about this, because it's a much deeper subject than you'd think, just hearing about, okay, letters from the front. But really, there's so much that's involved in it, and so much, I'd say, emotion and personal history, and just, like you said, the letters of receiving a handwritten letter, not only at the front but at home, meant so much for everybody. And it's still something that I'm sure that they do now, even with email. But it's certainly a subject that I hadn't really thought of until you brought it to my attention, Don. So thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you, Jim. Thanks for joining us. You really made some good contributions. We're glad to have you today.
Well, I was glad to be here. And, this is one of the better aspects of the war to talk about.
That's right. That's right.
Well, to our audience, please like, share, subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube so you're the first to know whenever we release new episodes. And thank you so much for watching the podcast. I'm sure, Don, this is your second or third program with us here on the Scuttlebutt. Jim, I'd love to have you back for another episode in the near future. And to our audience, please come back next week for another future episode. Thank you for watching this episode of the Scuttlebutt. As sort of bonus content, you've heard me speak about the VBC's Happy Hour, which we hold every single Monday night on Zoom at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We noticed that in a recent interview with the Marine Corps veteran Jack McLean, author of the book Loon, that he spent some time during that interview talking about letters that he wrote home. So we thought we'd clip that segment of the interview and place it here at the end of the podcast for you, just to give you some background. Kids like Jack McLean, they didn't go to Vietnam. He was a graduate of the elite Phillips Academy in Andover, Mass., but he decided to put off college and enlist in the United States Marine Corps instead. A year later, Jack landed in Vietnam as a grunt to serve in an infantry company in the northernmost reaches of South Vietnam. And what happened there is the centerpiece of his superb memoir, Loon, which there is a link in the description here if you would like to take a look at his book. But enjoy this snippet of his interview with Ken Kazak on the VBC Happy Hour. Thank you again for watching.
So you had shared earlier that you wrote 102 letters home, and I guess Marines and service people don't write letters anymore. They email home, and it was your mom saved all these letters. And yeah. I know from your bio that you lived in different places. So I assume wherever you moved to, you took these letters with you.
Well, in fact, I moved to a lot of places and mom hung onto the letters. And then when my mother died in the late 80s, I sort of got the letters, and it was, and they stayed in the shoebox. And when I was remarried, I don't know, 10 years later, 15 years later, my then wife was not a particularly sentimental person. And we were going through my apartment saying, well, we, get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this. And we had the save bin and the other bin, and I didn't have to do that much in my apartment. And she's holding this box of letters and said, what are these? And I said, oh, those are the letters I wrote home when I was in the Marine Corps and in Vietnam. And she said, just, okay, but they go in this bin or that bin. And I said, no, I don't know. I guess I should save them. Why? Because my mother always thought that I could write a book about them. And then she said, why don't you? And that was something I didn't have an answer to. And that was when my wheels were starting to come off anyway, from my PTSD, from my exposure to Agent Orange, from diabetes. I mean, all these things were just starting to catch up with me, as they did with so many vets so many years later. And I just sat down and I started to transcribe them as therapy. And one thing led to another.
Well, you said that you started to transcribe them for your daughters and then for people that you met from Charlie Company. But when you were just writing the letters, and then like, what was the format? How were you presenting those?
The letters.
Just the letters themselves.
Yeah, the letters. I wrote the letters, and then
Right.
I went back, and I said I should probably fill in some blanks here. If I talk about Dan Burton, I should probably say who Dan Burton is and put a little backstory in there. If I'm talking about different things in boot camp, I should probably put some context in there for things that I talk about. And then I started putting sort of muscle on the bones, if that makes sense. And I kept going. And when I finally got this editor number of years later, and I wanted it to be me talking through my letters. I wanted to be, the story of a 19-year-old talking through letters. And she said, you're a much better writer now than you were at 19. And I said, well, okay, so, and she said, no, I mean, the story of you telling it now, the stuff that you have in the muscle is better than the stuff that you had on the bones, on your letters. And so I went from having 102 letters to having, I don't know, maybe a paragraph or two from different letters I might have put in. And it was I didn't know that I was a writer. I didn't know that, I had no thought that, I had no thought that I was a writer. I just was putting in stuff until she said, how that it was much better, that it fit much better that way.
When did it happen that you lived above a fellow's garage in North Carolina? With the unusual town name of Kill Devil Hills. But was he also a Marine?
Yeah, he was in Charlie Company.
Charlie Company.
With me and Dad. Yeah.
So you moved in above this garage, and then that's when this is going to be a book. That's when you started the process. But
that was actually when the process ended, and I had, assuming my former wife's not on this call, I was living in Georgetown, and our marriage ended with the final words of, I don't care if I ever hear the word Vietnam again. And I'd spent a good deal of the previous 5 years going through this, and it was more than writing. It was therapy. It was my therapy. And so that was that. And Terry, the guy whose garage I'd been living in Kill Devil Hills, where in fact the Wright brothers flew their first plane, was a huge source of, as Dan would attest, of information. He had I tell people he was cursed with a near perfect knowledge of everything that happened to us while we were there. And so he was a good guy to bounce things off of. But I got I finished writing it right before I went down there, and I got the offer from Random House right when I got there, and they weren't going to publish it for another year. So I had a year down there when I basically knew that it was going to be published, and I got the advance, which was fortunate because I didn't have a pot to piss in. So.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Scuttlebutt. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. Tobacco-Free Adagio Health has been supporting the podcast for quite some time now. We've been so pleased to be supported by them. They are dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and getting the word out about the hazards of smoking and secondhand smoke. They're all about health, so they want people to quit. They have classes, nicotine replacement therapy, and a popular quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They also educate people, children especially, about tobacco use from cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chew, snuff, and other nicotine products like vaping. And finally, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health advocates for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all about what Tobacco-Free Adagio Health offers at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. Or you can check out the 2 Scuttlebutt episodes that featured Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. We had a wonderful representative come on to the podcast, talk to us about all the classes and therapies that they offer. It was 2 wonderful conversations, so I definitely direct you to both of those if you want more information, or just call their free quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. Thank you again, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health, for your support.